Her own sister convinced the prince that his fiancée had betrayed him. As a result, he stripped the girl of her status as queen and cast her out into the cold, leaving her to die. But the girl is saved by a handsome prince who is also her enemy. After some time, she falls in love with him, and they join forces against her former fiancé. Will the princess manage to reclaim her throne? Find out right here in this video. Subscribe to the channel and give it a like if you want to see more. Somewhere in the mountains, where there was an incredible flurry of snow, a man stood on the edge of a cliff. He took a step forward as if he wanted to accept his death. Her hair was tangled, and her face was covered with bruises and wounds. The girl seemed to have no reason to live anymore if she decided to do such a serious and wrong thing. There was nothing holding her in this world. The girl was flying down the mountain backwards. Her hands were up as if trying to grab onto something, and her eyes were so indifferent, so calm. And then she fell to the ground and lay there, not moving. But it looks like the girl was alive, and she didn't even feel the pain. She was lying with her arms outstretched in the cold snow, dreaming that she was going to die soon. The girl was lying there looking at the snowflakes that were whirling around and falling like gunpowder on the ground, covering all the mountains with white fluff. Somewhere in the distance, a man's voice was heard, so heavy and strong. The man looked at the girl and said, "That was funny." The guy approached the body, which was lying in the snow, only moving its eyes and doing nothing. He said, "Being banished to death, you lie there as if you were going to rule over everything in this snowy field. This is like you, Empress." He looked at her as he spoke in his confident tone. Slowly, and without sudden movements, the guy bent down on one knee and asked if she really wanted to give up her life. The man paused for a moment, trying to lift the Empress by the arms, because it was simply impossible to leave her here. He continued, "I will gladly take your life and escape." The man held the Empress in his arms, looking at her pale face, which could not say anything in response, and she kept her eyes closed because she was exhausted and did not have the strength to even open her eyelids. The man lowered his head. His eyes were red and angry, and he only wanted revenge on the person who had brought the girl to this state. The man looked at her and said, "You are mine now, Empress." The young man took the Empress from the snowy field, so cold and empty, but it didn't start in a snowy field. It started in the Thanatos Palace, where young people had fun together. There was an unknown man who sat down in a chair, and a woman approached him from behind. She was dressed in an open red dress, her arms wrapped around the neck of the man who sat there as if he didn't care about the girl's words and movements. He was only listening to what she was saying. "Use this Natasha, your majesty." The man lowered his head, and the girl only whispered in his ear, "Get rid of the Empress and create your own state, the most powerful of all." The man gritted his teeth and got really angry, as if he was aware of the problem but could not solve it. The Empress lived in the Empire of Thanatos, which was an empire of snow and gold, and everything in this vast empire could have belonged to the Emperor Gilotti, but it seems that none of the above went to him. The Empress was a very spectacular and uniquely beautiful woman who was very powerful and strong, not only morally, but also physically. But the Emperor could not do anything without her permission. They were as if dependent on each other. One had everything, and the other had nothing. The strange girl continued to whisper all sorts of insidious things in the man's ear. "Give me the Empress's elder brother. Give him back. Just give him back." This girl had been trying to seduce the Empress's brother for a long time, but she was still unsuccessful. But the girl never gave up hope that one day she would take the throne for herself. But the Emperor knew one main thing. The Empress loved her brother very much, and was ready to sacrifice everything she had for him. She loved and supported him to the point of madness. The girl continued to talk about her strange plan, whispering in the Emperor's ear, but the more she tries, the sooner she will become a bad Empress who covers up the terrible crimes of her beloved brother. She encouraged the Emperor to plant evidence of his treason in the room of the Empress's brother. This would definitely make him flee from punishment. The girl pushed the Emperor onto the bed with her hands pressed to the bed. She hovered over him and ominously called for the murder of all those who were favorable to the Empress. The stranger began to list the people to be killed. Kill everyone, her close servants, relatives, acquaintances, friends, and even people she knows. Kill everyone she loves. The stranger said, imagining the Empress standing alone in the middle of a cave with no one but her and her fears. But the plan did not end there, so she continued. However, she will appear in the ballroom and meet His Majesty face to face. Then Natasha will announce in front of all the guests what your child is wearing. This will be the last time she will stand there as Empress, because she will be a bad woman who will try to kill her prince. The stranger saw a horrifying picture of the Empress walking down a dark corridor covered in blood, her long, elegant dress covered in bloodstains. The girl continued, only out of fear of losing her position. Her sparkling earrings twinkled, and her eyes sparkled at what she thought was a brilliant and unsurpassed idea. The girl did not stop refining her revenge plan and talked about it. "Family and friends will help cover her," said the stranger. The stranger continued, "That's when she will draw her sword." And a picture appeared before my eyes, a sword covered in blood. The young stranger said, "With her smart head, she'll find a way to survive to block the way. Stain it with blood." A disgusting picture of the Empress in a sea of blood and loneliness, with her fears and terrible thoughts stuck in her mind. The stranger realized that no matter how smart she was, if all the people died, she would not be able to do anything. Then she would have no one to rely on. She would be alone. Everyone would die with her support. Everyone she loved so much would die. At that time, the Empress was walking through the empire of snow and gold with her assistant and servant. Then she stood in the middle of the hall and leaned on her crutch. She was the 17th Empress of Thanatos, so strong and courageous. She also had a broken leg, but that didn't stop her from being who she was. Her name was Roselyn Fifth Sunset. Her portraits were on the main walls of the castle, and a golden frame adorned the entire masterpiece. Everyone knows her as an exquisite, beautiful, and generally perfect empress. She was also a brilliant strategist, an excellent diplomat, and spoke 6 languages. She can also be credited with building national hospitals and taking care of the poor and sick. She was given the status of Empress of the Heart. She could sit next to the sick for hours and help them morally. Everyone loved her despite her broken leg. She was so wonderful and loving. Everyone loved her for the things she did. Her appearance was very special and incredibly impressive. But there was a person in this world who hated Empress Roselyn. It was the Emperor and the husband of Roselyn herself. It's been a long time since these two lovers got married in the past and took an oath to a happy married life. Despite this, Roselyn learned of a plan to eliminate all her subordinates and imprison her innocent brother and abdicate Roselyn. However, her strength was impressive. "I can't fall. I still have to protect many innocent and good people." Roselyn's servant was of the same opinion as her empress. She knew one secret. Roselyn had a broken leg because she was saving His Majesty and her husband. But when they returned, everything was upside down. The subordinate recalled the situation when the Empress entered her room and sat down on the bed with her leg forward. The servant was very worried because it could have been very painful for Roselyn, but she reassured her and said, "I am alive, and that is enough." The servant decided to ask, "Are you always like this?" The Empress returned her gaze to her, and she continued, "Because you are so strong, will this hard fate still make you fall someday?" Returning to reality and not to memories, the Empress walked easily along the corridor, hearing a light melody in her ears. She walked quietly and was silent, thinking about something. The servant called the Empress, and she returned to her call. She was obviously thinking that the Imitator would kill her, but she was silent for a few seconds. Not understanding what was going on, Roselyn said, "I'm fine, please open the door." Suddenly, Anya's voice rose to a scream, and she began to shout, "I will be with you to the end of my life, unconditionally!" The Empress lowered her head, taking a calm breath in and out, and calmed the servant girl. Her Majesty said, "All my loved ones have left me because of an accident and serious illness." Roselyn began to list a few of them. Miss Charlotte, a charming and naive girl, the Minister of the Interior, and a trusted supporter, even a knight captain who protected me. The Empress continued, "In fact, he is the one who caused their deaths." A picture of the Emperor appeared in my mind. His face was covered, and his hair was so white and luxurious that it could not but fascinate. Roselyn looked at Anna and thought, "Anna is the last person left with me. I can't lose her." So Roselyn said, "If something happens to me, go away as far as you can, as far away as possible. I have already prepared a house for you." But Anna's reaction was obvious. Her eyes filled with tears, and her voice rose again to shout, "What? Your Majesty, why do you say that?" Anna could not believe that someday the moment might come when she would be forced to leave Her Majesty, forget the way to this castle, and never come here again. She said, "How can I leave you, Rose?" But Roselyn just smiled and said, "Rose, I haven't heard that name for a long time." Anna continued to shout, "Please be patient a little longer. Count Sorrento is trying, and so is the Sunset family." However, Rose was very calm and gentle. She did not shout or even raise her voice. She spoke in a barely audible voice, almost a whisper. Anna was very angry with her empress for being so indifferent to her possible loss of the throne, but she had no choice but to grit her teeth as tightly as she could afford to and open the damn door behind which were heaps of people and rich representatives of the throne. Anna approached the door on the right side and pushed it forward, saying, "Her Majesty, the Empress is coming out." Rose walked slowly and elegantly along the blue carpet, passing tall columns, statues, and people. Everyone looked at Her Majesty and fell silent, waiting for Rose to come out. She walked with a crutch but was unsurpassed in her look. She went on and on until she reached the Emperor. The Emperor just smiled arrogantly and contemptuously and thought, "With this broken leg, she can still enter the ballroom. What a terrible woman." Their eyes crossed. Neither of them was happy to see the other, and they definitely did not want to be, as some say. Rose continued to look emotionlessly into the Emperor's eyes. The Emperor continued to look emotionlessly into Rose's eyes. His Highness snapped at Rose and started shouting, "You have an injured leg, so you don't have to be present." But Rose's endurance shocked her. "It hurts, but it doesn't mean I can't walk, Your Majesty." The Emperor spoke harshly about the situation. Somewhere behind me, I heard a man say, "Look." One of the guys said, "It's the Empress!" This guy was the attractive and calm Tamon Xaris Amor, who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs. The boy turned over his shoulder to look at the Empress standing in her cloak. Everyone in the hall listened to her motivational speech. People can fall, they can get exhausted, but they should never go the right way. Luckily, I will never lose my way. The Emperor's ears were simply bursting with this speech. If he could, he would have killed this woman here and now, but he could not. Then she just thought about herself. Rose was silent, and only mentally said, "The only ones who make us fall are ourselves." Rose is strong. She has to protect the honor of her father and mother. It is very important to her. And the treasure of the sensei that is passed down from generation to generation, a relic and an object that no one should ever destroy. In the middle of the hall, a girl in a red puffy dress appeared with a tower in her hands, covering her face. She walked lightly and gently through the hall, saying, "Your Majesty." The disguise of the fan did not help Natasha hide her face, so Rose recognized her and her long, silky curls immediately. Natasha looked depressed and overwhelmed. She said, "Punish me, please." She knew that this party was intended for foreign countries, so the nobles of the empire were not invited. Rose openly showed her indignation and anger. "Why are you here?" asked the Empress. But Natasha was a great actress, so she just kept repeating, "It's all my fault, it's all my fault." Natasha came very close to Rose and said, "If I hadn't announced that I was having a child with His Majesty, the Earl of Canley, your brother, would not have done me any harm." Everyone in the room turned sharply to Natasha. The guests split into groups and discussed the situation. This child and Miss Natasha, how it could have happened and why it happened so suddenly. A cloud of anger and aggression seemed to hang over Roselia's face, and she could barely control herself, even though she knew it was not true. Natasha kept repeating, "It's all my fault, it's all my fault." But suddenly, Miss Natasha took Rosalie's hand and said, "But I hope that..." Then everything happened in a second. Rosalie was holding a dagger in her hands. In a second, Natasha was already lying on the floor covered in blood and unconscious. Everyone was in a frenzy. Everyone was looking at Rose and Natasha, who were in the alcove. One of them had allegedly killed the other, and the other had allegedly died. The red dress was already dark maroon in color from blood. Silky white curls began to fill with blood. Everyone was screaming and fussing. Not knowing what to do, someone was already running to Natasha's aid. A man in the audience attracted the attention of everyone present. He ordered that Natasha be taken to a safe place where she could recover. The Emperor sat in his throne with a wide smile. He enjoyed every second of this house that was happening around him. Every voice, every scream and sound of crying. Then the Emperor stood up from his throne and shouted, "What are you doing?" Rosalie stood in the middle of the hall. In front of her was Natasha's bloody body. A knife was in her hand. People were shouting from the side, and Rosalie did not even have time to say anything. Everyone was shouting in chorus, "Surround the Empress now!" Rosalie looked at Natasha's body one last time and saw a crooked smile on her face, so ugly and disgusting that Rosalie could not bear it. Natasha mentally wished Rosalie a safe journey, and the smile disappeared from her face. Bloodstains smeared the floor next to the carpet. Everyone was looking at the wet red mark left by Natasha after the show. Foreign Minister Tamon Xaris, with red eyes, looked at this scandal, show, or just an incredibly ugly scenario by Natasha. The Emperor shouted for the boy to stop, but the boy didn't care. The Emperor kept shouting and just tore his throat out. Tamon Xaris thought, "What a fool!" The guy thought. To throw away the entire power of the empire with his own hands, this brainless bastard doesn't even know how valuable his empress is. Rose was put in an isolation ward. She has always and all her life served only the empire. The minister was very disappointed by this, and simply did not believe in the reality of the situation around him. A girl with a glass of wine, a red-haired beauty, said, "Well, it looks like an empress." She continued, "She won't survive this winter." Roselyn was sitting on her knees in prison. She was powerless and could do nothing. Before throwing the empress out, he tortured her and interrogated her to tell him where the Sunset family's treasures were. Despite this brutal torture, this abuse, and this attitude, Roselyn understood the real reason for the emperor's behavior. Her back was covered with numerous wounds and bruises. Her back was terrible. Roselyn went through the pain every day without saying a word. She endured every drop of it. It is not known how many days have passed in the palace since the beginning of that situation. Her subjects heard the latest news and rushed to save the empress from such severe suffering in the isolation ward. They stood for hours at the gates of the castle and asked for mercy on Her Majesty. She deserves forgiveness and pardon. Many people shouted from behind the gate for clemency for Rose, who was breathing heavily from wounds on her back and shoulders at the time. His Majesty went out on the balcony. He was very angry to see people under his windows screaming for hours. He thought that they would soon stop shouting at the whole empire and go away, but they stood there for a long time asking for his forgiveness. But he couldn't kill her either. It would have made the locals very angry. Rose was in prison, bleeding to death. She was barely alive and ready to die herself if only this torment would end. Her face was beaten and covered with huge bruises. Her clothes were torn and covered in blood. She was very dirty and wet. A sound suddenly reached the isolator. Roselyn looked up to see who had entered her room this time. It was the emperor. He was calm and smiling a little at Roselyn. He said, "In the end, I didn't get any information from you." Roselyn looked at him with disgust and twisted her face to show that she hated him for everything he had done. But the emperor did not care. He just kept talking and saying, "You really look like the Empress of Snow. No matter how much you are tortured, you still won't tell me where you hid the treasure." He wanted to tear Roselyn's body to pieces, wanted to throw her away and destroy her until she screamed and hurt, but he couldn't. People were crying out for mercy and wanted Roselyn to be released and pardoned so that she could stay alive. The emperor said, "I am giving you life, so be grateful for what you have." Someone was shouting for the woman to be thrown out on the icy mountain of the Kroturia. The shackles fell down. They were unhooked by the walls. Roselyn was sitting there covered in blood and bruises. There were hints of tears in her eyes, but she did not show her pain. She was strong and tried not to give anything away. But the emperor said, "Wait a second." The emperor stepped back a little to give the servants access and continued, "I have a gift for you." He smiled and looked at Roselyn. The same gift from the emperor flew to the ground. Roselyn's face was very surprised. It was the first time he had seen her like that. Rose saw her mom? Dad? What? Roselyn screamed as hard as she could. She screamed so hard that she soon began to cough. "Gilotti, Thanatos!" She was thrown to the ground. Her head was at the level of her parents' heads. She saw the severed heads. She saw only the heads of Roselyn's parents. Roselyn screamed, "Why? Why are you doing this to me? Tell me!" But the emperor ignored the question and said with a smile, "Oh, so you can make this expression too? Unbelievable." Roselyn gritted her teeth and said, Absolutely." Roselyn took a deep breath and shouted with all her might, "I will never forgive you." Tamon Xaris came to the mountain overlooking the castle on horseback. He heard these tearing screams from inside Roselyn and said, "It looks like she's still alive." The empress of his enemy was dethroned, and he hated the emperor for it. Rage filled the whole body of Tamon Xaris, and his rage raged like a tornado. He did not know the real reason why this was happening, but he was sure of one thing. Someday the time will come. Sooner or later, this palace will be destroyed. He was looking at this magnificent palace full of little details. It was so luxurious. There were so many different stories and treaties connected to it. The kindest and best empress in the world lived here. She was very nice. This palace gave her the opportunity to help people. She felt protected. But in one moment, everything changed. However, Tamon Xaris continued, "One day I will burn it to the ground." A boy ran up behind the guy, also on a horse, and asked him, "What are you looking at?" He looked in the direction Tamon was looking and said, "Thanatos Palace?" Tamon just shook his head and sighed heavily, showing that he was having a hard time right now. Tamon's red-haired friend stroked his horse's mane affectionately. The boy asked, "What are we going to do now?" and received a quick answer from Tamon. "I heard they left her on the mountain of the Kroturia." Now the two of them were outraged at the emperor's miserable behavior, treating his wife so cruelly. Tamon said, "Compared to all the women I have ever known." He glanced at the bars where Roselyn was sitting. He continued, "She was the strongest." Her image immediately flashed in my head, her earrings and his look at her. The guy went on to say, "She was the most beautiful." And the last word that completed the image of all those synonyms for Roselyn's name, and the most pathetic, his eyes were filled with rage. He wanted to destroy this palace now without waiting a second. He didn't care about snow or rain. He just wanted to destroy it. Tamon sharply pulled the horse's strap, giving the command forward. The red-haired friend didn't understand why it happened. All he said was, "Again?" "Hey, Tamon," the guy said. But Tamon was already running with all his might in an unknown direction. The boy took off and ran after Tamon, who was running at high speed on his black horse. His eyes burned with rage, but his direction was still unknown. The guy ran without noticing that a friend of the redhead was running behind him and called out to him. It seemed to become clear where he was running. On the horizon, a female white figure could be seen. Long, snow-white curls and arms in different directions, scattered as if the girl did not care where she was. The girl was lying on the snow and thought, "If I die like this, our Gilotti? Damn you, son!" It was the Empress. She had just fallen from a mountain and survived, but she was definitely not happy about it. She wanted to end this torment once and for all. Memories of her brother and Charlotte flashed before her eyes. Rose said, "Mom, brother, I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry." Rose realized that everyone who was so important to her was dead. Her mother, father, servants, and loved ones, all dead. Rosie lay in the snow thinking and saying in her mind, "I just wanted to do my best. I wanted to be a good empress." The girl did not realize why her desire to become a better person turned into such a tragedy for her. But she had already accepted it. She said, "Okay." The girl continued, "I will meet you all again soon." A black horse stopped near her body. It was Tamon. He saw the motionless body of the girl Rose and instantly realized what to do. He crouched down from his horse, breathing heavily and gulping air greedily. He slowly began to approach Rose step by step. The guy finally said, "I have nothing to say about that. You're lying here tortured to death, alone, like the ruler of these snowy fields." He came even closer, so that he was facing Roselyn. The guy could say nothing else. He just gritted his teeth and thought, Why? Why? He sat down on his knee in front of her and continued to think, "Why were you born in Thanatos?" The boy could not understand how Roselyn could marry such a scoundrel as the emperor. Again, many questions of why, wherefore, and for what purpose were running through my mind. Her body lay motionless. Her hair was scattered in the snow, and her hands, how? He knelt down even further and thought, "Why didn't I meet you earlier?" Tamon was lifting Roselyn's body out of the snow. She was so exhausted, so wet, she couldn't even say anything. Tamon said, "If you don't need your life anymore, then I'm sorry, but I'll take it for myself." He almost lifted her up, touched her face and said, "Your Majesty." Tamon gently pressed Roselyn's body against his. His warmth enveloped the girl, and then Tamon kissed Roselyn as gently as he could. 2 words changed Roselyn's life from then on. Tamon said, "You are mine." After that, Tamon thought about how God created people. He was interested in people's emotions, joy, sadness, anger, and he put it all in the oven. God was very pleased and wanted to create good and sincere people. The stove was cooking, and all the good things that would help humanity were cooked with it. But suddenly, in the process, evil jumped into the pot, into the good pot. That's how people were created, on the edge of good and evil. Someone chose the good side and lived along this endless path of smiles and sincerity. And someone chose the path of evil, and all the time harmed people and sowed anger and fear. People harmed each other. They started wars for no reason. The first death was caused by Melon, and the deaths continued, more and more of them. The king of the gods was very angry when he heard about it, and he tore the god who created humans to pieces. And at the cost of God for creating such a thing, the king of God threw the parts of the body of God into the human world, where there were thousands of wars. The 6 parts are separated and stored in several different things. They were the color of the sky, blue and pure, gentle and light. The parts were different, some related to time, some to the land, and some to the ocean. And the rest lives in people, miracles by God's power. For example, hypnosis, visions of the future, or even weather control and death. A force of life appeared in the world that made people strive to live and develop. This power of life is love, sincerity in feelings, joy in small things. The power of life is the little things in kisses, the little things you notice most often. The power of life is transmitted through the exchange of one's own energy. Some call it a breath of fresh air into a new life. Tamon ran with Roselyn in the snow. He held her head, warming her body, and Tamon tried to get to the shelter as quickly as possible. Tamon could not believe that he was hugging this woman. It seemed so unattainable, and now he was riding a horse holding her unconscious. He had to save Rose at all costs. She was very important to him. They stopped at a house in front of which many people were standing and watching them with interest. The guys from Thanatos seemed to be sick and sneezed a little. A red-haired boy and friend of Tamon's drove the whole process. He was strict and hurried everyone along. Tamon held the girl in his arms as he passed trees and bushes. The red-haired guy saw Tamon and the girl in his arms and shouted, "Hey, wait! Who are you holding in your arms?" The guy continued, You take her body?" Tamon ignored him and went into the house opposite. The red-haired man was very surprised at this behavior. He did not understand why the guy brought the corpse of a girl who had fallen down the mountain a few minutes ago and had no chance of dying. Tamon took his jacket off Rosie and put her to bed. She sighed heavily and put her hand on the living, squeezing it until it hurt. The boy looked at her with eyes so calm and trustworthy. I remembered the phrase, "I do not allow." At a feast and negotiations between the Empress and her guests, she said, in response, "Did you say that you could prevent the appearance of pirates?" Roselyn said, "If I give you that island, my ocean will be meters smaller." She continued, "Moreover, that island is in conflict with the Liger Empire, don't you know?" The guy opposite was Tamon. He said, "Only meters. Besides, we can carefully remove the island in the disputed territory." They were negotiating about the island of Tamon, and he said, "If you're still worried, I'll choose another island without any problems." But Roselyn agreed to this offer. Maybe she needed money or something, but she agreed to it. Roselyn raised her head with a firm expression and said, "So that's your goal." Tamon, on the other hand, was as calm and cheerful as possible, as if deleting an island was like playing a game. After that, Roselyn started talking about an unknown ship. Amor's ship sank near the island of Guldal. The girl continued, "I think there was something on that ship." Tamon's face abruptly changed from a smile to a frown and readiness for discussion. "But I'm sorry, this ship was chosen by the Sunset family. Roselyn has set a new condition. She will give away everything on that ship, and in return. Instead, she asked me to bring her a rare red cocoon that looked like a sized coin." Tamon came out of his memories and looked at the exhausted Roselyn, who was lying in bed all dirty and covered in blood and bruises. Looking at her, he said, "This woman, she has been granted the right to exchange the red cocoon that grows only in Amory." He continued, "But despite the fact that she is extremely annoying, she is also a wise and unrivaledly intelligent girl and beautiful inside and out." Roselyn wailed quietly, paralyzed by the pain throughout her body that was piercing after the torture. Tamon looked at her while she cried like a helpless kitten. He thought that he had not given her enough of the power of life that should have freed her from pain with a kiss. She was the one whom Tamon wanted to kill. She was his enemy, but he didn't understand why. Looking at her suffering, he also wanted to suffer like her. He felt sick at the sight of this suffering. He pressed her harder and held her back and kissed her again. Roselyn was able to open her eyes through the pain. At first, she did not realize who was kissing her, but she saw the face of Tamon Xaris. Roselyn was surprised and angry at the same time, and her heart beat faster than usual. She pushed Tamon and slapped him on the cheek with a ringing sound. Roselyn wiped her lips in disgust and asked, "What are you doing?" Tamon turned his head to Roselyn and said, "I'm treating you, so be good." She screamed for the boy to take her back to the mountain, but Tamon replied, "I want you to be alive." The blood in Roselyn's body was boiling like a volcano. She hadn't expected this and was definitely not happy about it. She was screaming, "Stay away, let me die." The guy wanted to give Rosie back the meaning of her life. He grabbed her hand and lifted it up firmly so that Rosie wouldn't hit him and said, "After everything that happened, you're going to leave everything like this?" He continued, "Having been tortured and disgraced, having lost my family and loved ones." But Roselyn just took a breath and said in a tone of regret and sadness, "I can't do anything more for them." But Tamon started shouting at her, "You were betrayed in a place you sacrificed your life for? Now you want to die in a snowy field?" Rosie lowered her head. Realizing that she had lived for this palace, she had given her whole life to it. Alk could not stop her, so she answered, "Yes, in a snowy field." Tamon did not know how else to encourage the girl to live. She had lost everything she had, but death was not an option. Roselyn grabbed Tamon's hand with her other one. She looked at him and said, "You're my enemy. You've always wanted to kill me, haven't you?" Roselyn put Tamon's arm around her so that he could strangle her, and she said, "So please don't say anything else to me." Tamon was outraged. How could she say that after all these years in the palace, next to everyone, she wanted to die because she had made a mistake and couldn't correct it? She put his other hand around her neck and said, "Just kill me now." Roselyn held his hands and said, "Don't hurt me again. Just kill me, please." Tamon realized that this woman was his worst enemy. She was in his way and spoiled his life constantly. He could close his eyes, kill the eyes that have no desire to live. But something stopped him. Something kept him from killing her right here and now. He remembered the island's negotiations. They'd been sitting around a table, and Roselyn had said she'd return everything from the sunken sunset in exchange for Amor's exclusive right to trade red cocoons. Her eyes sparkled. She had everything. She had power, a palace. She was not tortured or beaten during the negotiations. And now Tamon had his hands around her neck, and her face was covered in blood and bruises, begging for death. He simply could not kill her. His inner strength did not allow him to do so. He looked at her with an angry look, as if he wanted to do it, but as if he didn't know what to do. He made his choice. Thinking about it, he said, "Desperate to die, I am no longer interested in killing you." Roselyn was surprised. She couldn't understand why. He hated her for everything, for every little thing, and now he refuses to kill her? He knelt down in front of her and began to kiss her leg. Roselyn screamed when she saw this. "What are you doing?" Tamon held her leg up and said, "I told you I would take care of you. Please don't move." Roselyn was screaming at him. Just stop. She was his enemy and wanted to do everything to make sure Tamon killed her. He kissed her leg and asked her to stop the tantrums and scandals. Roselyn said, "Please stop. I beg you." The guy was furious. He was trying his best to give Roselyn a chance to live. Roselyn couldn't believe the situation. She couldn't just accept that her enemy didn't want to kill her. He could do anything he wanted, but he chose to kiss her feet to heal her. He shouted, "Fight, Empress!" Looking directly at her, he grabbed her legs and pressed her closer, standing a few centimeters away from her. He would say, "I can't believe you're begging for something from someone, damn it." The guy continued, "Fight if you want something from me or others. Fight and win at any cost, because this is your life." Roselyn remembered Tamon at the negotiating table in an elegant outfit that emphasized Tamon's strength. She smiled at him, looking directly into his eyes. Tamon stepped on his face and said, "Just like that time with the island, I will get what I want." He grabbed her hand again and continued to say, "Don't be stupid." Looking her in the eye, furrowing his brows, and in a raised tone, he continued, "Fight me, for your own sake." The guy said in a calm tone and without shouting, "Isn't that what you've always done?" He gently released her hand, and Roselyn fell exhausted on the bed. Tamon quietly walked out of the room and into the street, where there was a lot of snow and birds flying to warmer climes to survive. He pulled back the tense curtain to get out of the room completely. He turned his head to see Roselyn sleeping in bed with her arms outstretched. She slept with her eyes closed, seemingly dreaming about everything related to Tamon. Thanatos Palace at that time was covered with heavy storms and snow. The emperor stood in his office, looking out the window, waiting for news from his servants. When he heard someone enter his room, he immediately asked, "Is she dead?" The servant got down on one knee and said, "Yes, your majesty, I swear it." But the emperor interrupted the servant and said, "How can you be sure if her body is not there?" The servant replied, "We found traces of blood, and most importantly, it was torn by wild animals." The emperor sighed and said, "Yes, all right, but what about the relic?" The servant fussed and said in a quiet tone, "Well, we haven't found her yet. Maybe they took her first." The emperor began to scream. He was outraged that the sacred relic had not yet been found and said, "Impossible! The empress still had it until that day." He ordered a search of the entire palace and all places associated with the empress to find the sacred relic. The servant nodded his head in agreement and went off in search of. The servant got up from one knee, unfolded his long and heavy cloak, and left the emperor's room. His Majesty thought, sat down in his chair, and the word battle flew through his mind. Suddenly, the emperor felt sick and thought, "I'm going to vomit." When he felt better, he thought about the hereditary power. The hereditary power that is passed on to the heir to the throne of Thanatos is death. Death is an opportunity inherited at the coronation of an emperor. Its size varies, depending on the capacity of the pretender to the throne, and the power of Emperor Gilotti. Balls of stench whirled out of his hands, but his power was not that great. the power of death that an ordinary person can use. In my mind, I saw a picture of a man lying in bed, sick and helpless. His face was not visible, and he could barely move. The power of death is to secretly introduce a plague into the body and cause a long and painful death, and every time you use it, you get a huge payoff. Gilotti, who is suspected of murdering the Empress, suffered a terrible reaction. He was very sick and in unbearable pain. In addition, this power prevents him from directly killing Roselyn. In his mind, he had a picture of him and Roselyn getting married, taking an oath for a happy married life and eternal support. And all this happened to Roselyn through a ritual at the wedding ceremony. The Emperor of Thanatos took his marriage vows and mixed drops of his own blood with holy water and gave it to the Empress. This is a ritual for married couples so that they don't turn knives against each other, so that nothing bad happens between them. So the Emperor tried to kill Roselyn in another way, bypassing the ritual. But this desire ended in a great failure because the Empress always protected the precious relics of the Sunset family, which was a pendant and a sacred relic. The Emperor sat on the floor holding his stomach, waiting for this unbearable pain to pass. Suddenly, the Emperor's attention shifted to the death of the Empress. He thought he had killed her, so he was sitting on the floor saying, "It worked! It worked perfectly and wonderfully!" He grabbed his head with both hands and said, "You're not as good as I heard, are you?" The Emperor's pain faded into the background. He walked around the room shouting the words, "Now you're dead, EH?" The Emperor continued to shout, "You should have treated me much better." Suddenly, the picture of the Emperor staggered off the wall and flew directly at His Majesty. He looked at it while it flew unabated directly at him. He managed to jump away, so the painting fell to the floor next to the Emperor. Several servants ran into the room at once, and upon hearing the sound, they immediately dropped what they were doing and ran to him as fast as they could. The Emperor was surrounded by 4 servants. They stood around, and 2 of them were worried about the Emperor, and the other 2 wondered how the painting could have fallen. But His Majesty looked down at the floor, looked around the room, and said, "Help me up now." He also ordered to get rid of the painting that had fallen and made the Emperor almost die of fear. He was very angry. His teeth were clenched together so tightly that they creaked. On the wall, the Emperor saw Empress Roselyn while the servants were taking his painting out, leaving him alone with the Empress. He came closer and closer and got angrier and angrier looking at her face, which irritated him so much every day. He had a dagger in his pocket, which he began to pull out of the sheath with a scream. The Emperor began to swing this dagger around the room, aiming at the painting, trying to get rid of it, shouting, "Die, die, die, you witch!" He shouted various bad words at the Empress, cutting the canvas with her photo, not noticing the servants behind him, who had not yet had time to take out the painting with his portrait. The Emperor's strength was already at an end, so he lowered the dagger to the floor and bent over with fatigue. He struggled to lift his green eyes with the last of his strength, barely holding onto his feet. I saw a picture of the Empress with many cuts on her, but Her Majesty's face was intact. The Emperor threw his dagger to the floor, unable to hold it any longer, and then he fell to the floor, rolling his legs and falling over. While it was very cold in winter in Thanatos, somewhere else in the desert, a group of people was walking. Some of them were on horseback and wearing white cloaks. They looked at the sun and could hardly stand the heat. Then one of the participants of the hike lifts her hood, and under it, we can see Roselyn. She walked and thought, "I would have been better off dying on that snowy mountain after all. Many days have passed since I was with him." An image flashed through my mind of her holding him by the shoulders in the night, her eyes closed. Roselyn recalled her hands, which were covered with bruises and wounds. She realized that she was not taking any medication, but she didn't need it because her hands didn't bother her anymore. The girl wondered about what Tamon had once said. Did he really have a healing effect? But Roselyn didn't want to believe it. All she could believe was that her wounds would regenerate and heal quickly. However, the girl made up a legend. Or maybe it was not a legend. Roselyn thought, "This hasn't happened for hundreds of thousands of years. He can't be the TH part of God." Roselyn thought about it. She didn't know if it was Tamon or her immunity, but Tamon always asked her how she was feeling. She looked at him with eyes full of surprise and pity at the same time. She didn't like to be pitied. Roselyn said, "Even though you saved me, one day I will die again." Tamon listened to her and did not say a word until she finished her long speech. The guy smiled and squeezed her harder and said, "I don't care anymore." He continued, "No matter how many times it happens, no matter how many times I have to save you, I will always do it." Roselyn thought about these words. She realized that Tamon did not want her to die, even though he had been her worst enemy before. Without thinking it through, Tamon said, "We're here. Then he turned to Roselyn, whose face was covered with a light cloth and a headscarf, and said, "This is my country, Amor." All the people followed Tamon and the leaders, those on horseback. The capital of Amor was Gwynedd, and that is where Roselyn and Tamon arrived. At the entrance, people were shouting and rejoicing that Tamon and the others had returned, waving their hands and shouting words of approval. Particular attention was paid to Tamon, with most girls shouting his name, but Tamon had no feelings. No one could make Tamon care as much as Roselyn did. The girl was lying calmly and motionless in his arms, snoring a little, and squinting her eyes from the scorching and hot sun. Tamon looked at his red-haired friend. His name was Lanaso. He called him and said, "I have things to do, so you will write the report." Tamon jumped up and ran. His friend was calling him, but Tamon did not notice him. He ran with Roselyn in his arms somewhere in the opposite direction of the city. Behind him he heard, "Oh, my general." Tamon stopped his horse and looked up, and he arrived at his mansion, where a thin old man was running by and shouting, "Oh, General, why did you come back so quickly?" Behind my grandfather, I heard shouts of, "Guys, come on, welcome the master." Tamon ignored all the questions and got down from the horse holding Rosalina in his arms without answering who she was or where she was from. Abruptly, Tamon turned to the boys and said in a very low voice, "Prepare warm water now." But my grandfather said, "Yes, I have already prepared it." Entering a large, spacious building called a mansion, Tamon saw his native ceiling with golden-edged columns, a lattice, and huge chandeliers all around. A short man stood in front of the main entrance, gesturing for Tamon to come in. Then the guy came in, but turned to the side and said, "Please don't let anyone in." The door slammed shut with a loud bang. It was a large and tall door, so the sound was so characteristic. The room was foggy, with chandeliers and candles burning around, and a blue carpet with embroidered patterns along the edges in the middle. Tamon slowly approached the bed in the corner of the room. After wrapping Roselyn in the typical clothes of the area, he laid her on the bed. Before picking her up again, Tamon ran his hand over her arm. He saw that Roselyn's wounds had healed completely, and she would not suffer from pain. Tamon took Roselyn in his arms again. A red thread was wrapped around her. Holding her in his arms, he went to the bathroom to wake Roselyn up. After dunking her in the water, Roselyn immediately began to choke and try to get out of the water. When she calmed down, she turned to Tomoya and asked in surprise, "Where are we?" Tamon didn't look any more saved. He squared his shoulders and said, "You're in my bathroom." Roselyn looked at the guy as if he had made it up. Roselyn thought, "I heard that Amor's commoners like to bathe because of the hot weather, but he's not a member of the royal family. How can he have such a big bathroom?" She looked back at his coat rack next to the bathroom. She was wearing some clothes and some weapons, and one of them was a dagger for self-defense. Tamon didn't understand what Roselyn was looking at for so long, so he asked, "What are you looking at?" Roselyn slowly turned to Tamon. She looked him in the eye and said, "It was the wrong choice to save me." But Tamon just smiled and closed his eyes, realizing that he only wanted her to stay alive. Roselyn came closer and closer. She would look at him and say, "You are so arrogant." The guy also looked at her and replied, "We are all arrogant." They smiled at each other as if they were flirting with each other. The girl stood in the corner of the bathtub and asked, "So, what was the purpose of bringing me here?" Tamon didn't understand what she was asking, because he had no purpose and it annoyed Roselyn. Tamon's gaze fell on the beautiful neckline. He could see a little more than he would have otherwise. Tamon was not ashamed of this, and did not take his eyes off her for a long time. Roselyn noticed this and said, "I didn't know you were crazy about women." The guy grabbed his head with one hand and was ashamed. He said, "Really? I didn't know I was crazy about my brother's empress either." However, Roselyn did not like it and said indignantly, "If you need a woman, find someone else. There are many more beauties waiting for you." Tamon's smile would be visible for miles. He would smile and say, "Of course, but they are not you." Roselyn said, "Your words sound like you want only me." But Tamon did not deny it. "That's right. I want you all." "That's ridiculous. I have nothing left." Tamon replied, "Why not? You have a lot of everything." He looked at her as she started to leave the bathroom and listed the qualities of a girl. "Your experience, your mind, your body, your heart. I want it all." Roselyn walked further and further back until she stopped at the wardrobe. She said, "If so, I owe you an apology." The guy's eyes opened sharply in surprise. He couldn't move, as if he was paralyzed. But from what? Everything became clear when the girl grabbed a dagger in self-defense. Roselyn put the dagger to her throat and made a small incision. Tamon couldn't move anymore. He stood there and watched Roselyn hurt herself. The girl began to cut her throat more and more. Looking at Tamon, drops of blood began to fall to the floor. and through her cough she said, "I can't give you any of this." Finally, Tamon woke up from his shock and ran to Roselyn to take the weapon from her. The dagger had already fallen to the floor, and there was a lot of blood on it, which had scattered around the room. Tamon was screaming. He was screaming, "You stupid woman! I saved your life! Why are you doing this to yourself again?" Roselyn's life flashed before her eyes, as if she were flying in space. Her ears were blocked and she could no longer hear anything, but she could think. This is what she was thinking at the last moment. Someone wants to kill me with all the cruelty and finish me off by throwing me down a mountain and hitting me with a metal yarn on my back. And someone wants to save my life. This is so strange. Do I deserve this? Roselyn felt a sharp pain in her neck. Tamon could think of nothing better than to suck the girl's blood with his lips. He lifted her to his knees and said, "Fortunately, the wound is not deep. You are just crazy." Tamon's rage raged like a hurricane, and he shouted at the girl, "How dare you kill yourself in front of me so easily?" He looked at her and said, "You gave up your life, and I saved you." Tamon recalled the situation on the mountain, how she fell and lay on the cold snow trying to die, thinking about death and dreaming of ending this life like this. The man looked at Roselyn and said, "I saved you with my power of life." He pressed the girl very close to him, squeezing her shoulders, and said, "And now I hug you like this, so tight and hopeless." The girl's throat rested on Tamon's shoulder, and she stopped breathing for a second. The guy held Roselyn by the shoulders and said through gritted teeth, "I have something to tell you, so you need to know." Tamon lowered his hands a little so that Roselyn could breathe and said, "You are mine now." On the street at that time, Lonasso was called by a girl. Her name was Tirancha Lantapu, Emperor of Amor. She was wearing wide and loose-fitting clothes with various details and patterns on her clothes. She came up to him to greet him and said, "Why didn't you come in?" But Lonasso was preoccupied with his thoughts. When the guy did not answer the Empress, she got angry and said insultingly, "Are you ignoring me, or what?" The boy was uncomfortable and could not communicate normally with the Empress, so at first he stood with his back to her, trying to gather his strength. And then, calmly putting on the mask of a cheerful Lonasso, he turned to the Empress with the words, "How could I, Your Majesty?" Lonasso came closer and closer, stopping at arm's length from the Empress. He said, "Thanks to your grace, we were able to return home safely." The Empress replied, "I knew you were on your way back, but I did not know you would come today." The girl wondered about Tamon, waiting for an answer from Lonasso, who mumbled something under his breath without giving a clear answer. Lonasso said, "He was so angry with Emperor Thanatos that his heart ached." The Empress did not believe this legend about the heart, but the guy continued to persuade me. He couldn't even say a word, he just went to his estate. It seems that the Empress believed it and said, "Everything is clear. One look at Emperor Thanatos will make even a healthy person sick. This miserable creature makes me want to vomit." However, the Empress wondered about her heart, which had never been in pain before, and then suddenly she had problems with it, perhaps something serious. So the girl, out of concern, decided to go and visit him right now, but Lonasso tried to stop Her Majesty. Trying to stop the Empress, the guy turned the attention to himself and said, "Could you please receive us first?" He continued his story. "Have you heard what that crazy emperor did this time? Don't you want to know the details?" After much persuasion, the Empress agreed to receive Lanos and his friends first, and at the same time, learn about the antics of Emperor Thanatos. The Empress raised her right hand in the air and shouted, "Let's have a party to celebrate your return home." Everyone in the street was pleased with this proposal and agreed. While she was talking to her servants, Lonasso was happy that he had not revealed Tamon's secret and remained without shouting and scandals in his direction. So he got on his white horse, made himself comfortable, and went inside the palace to settle down. One of the maids called for him to follow her somewhere. Meanwhile, there was a lot of steam and heat in the bathroom. Tamon kissed Roselyn, thus healing her and her wound from the knife she had put to her throat while trying to die. A dull and barely audible knock was heard behind the door, as if someone was passing by, but no one disturbed them. Roselyn was pressed against Tamon's torso, holding on to him with her hands and thinking, "Is he really treating me with this method? Or does he just want to use me?" Because of these thoughts, she pushed him away from her so that she was at arm's length. They found themselves staring at each other, neither realizing what was happening. Roselyn screamed a little from the unexpected kisses, and her thoughts mixed with the actions Tamon was doing to help her heal the wound. The man looked down at the girl while Rasklin sat on the floor and whimpered quietly because she did not understand what she wanted. Suddenly, a big smile appeared on her face. She wiped her mouth as if disgusted and said, I feel much better already. Then Tamon hovered over Roselyn and said, What are you going to do? I hope you don't want to die anymore. Tamon continued to speak, looking directly at Roselyn. Don't look at me with those angry, rage-filled eyes. The guy leaned a little closer to the girl and said, Actually, your look awakens my deepest instincts. Roselyn was embarrassed by these words. She didn't want this. It was one of her biggest fears. She remembered how her husband, the emperor, had spoken of her, and how he had ridiculed her in front of the maids and guests of their palace. He said such outrageous things. I don't even know whether I was in my bed or in the stables outside the palace. I had to hold this cold and unapproachable empress in my arms, and it does not bring me any pleasure at all to sleep with her. Next to her, anyone would lose his virility. The emperor ridiculed the girl in front of his guests, not realizing how hard it was for her. Roselyn was not used to caresses and petting, and lovemaking had always been a form of violence for her, as the emperor liked to force her to undress so that he could roughly grab her hair. It was the only way to take over Roselyn. The girl remembered all these humiliating words and images, and she did not want to repeat it again, did not want to feel this humiliating look on her and the abuse of her body. She begged Tamon to leave her alone. She thought that all men behaved like this. How anyone could like it just did not fit in her head. But Tamon did not go anywhere. He stayed next to Roselyn, not understanding why she was so aggressive about it. Roselyn said, Do I look like the kind of person who would obey your orders? Tamon looked at the girl in surprise. He had been trying to find out something about her. He liked her and wanted to be there to save her from an inevitable early death. The girl continued, You saved my life, which I no longer need, and you think I will be obedient? She looked at him with an angry look, showing that he took her against her will and that she was not grateful for what he did. Then she placed her hand just below her collarbone to show that she was independent and could make her own decisions without Tamon's help or guidance. The guy lowered his head, not knowing how to deal with this stubborn character of Roselyn and how to explain to her the meaning of life. But in his heart, he has already accepted Rosie's desire to die and end her life. He only wants to protect her from rash actions. He looked at her and her stubbornness, her evil character, but that's how he had always seen her, and he loved her for who she was, so he was ready to tolerate her. Tamon realized that Roselyn had lost everything she had sacrificed for and worked and walked for so long. He remembered her body on the snowy mountain, all wounds and bruises. She was powerless, and the desire to die just haunted her. It showed that Roselyn had nothing left of what she had before. She was waiting for death as a reality. She wanted it, and she wanted to end her endless suffering and pain in this Thanatos palace without knowing anything about the emperor and his servants. Tamon remembered Roselyn putting her hands around his neck, begging for death to end this nightmare of pain and humiliation. The man compared the two girls as before and after. He liked the current Roselyn even more. She had become even more beautiful, confident, and brave, so she tried to die, but Tamon thought he could convince her otherwise. He would touch her lips and say, You really make me lose control. But Rose's hands hit the man hard in the palm of his hand and threw them as far away as possible to keep him from touching her. Tamon's eyes were surprised and widened with a lack of understanding of what she really wanted and what she wanted to get from him. She turned her head in the opposite direction from Tamon and said, You! Don't you dare! She covered herself with one hand and said, Don't you ever touch my lips again. I remembered the picture of their kiss, where he held her chin and kissed her, thus healing her wounds. Tamon lowered his head. He knew that he would have to accept this decision. Otherwise, he would lose her and would not be able to regain her trust. The guy said, I understand you and I promise you, before he finished his sentence. Roselyn's eyes were already wide with surprise. He continued, If you don't like it, I won't do anything against your will. Tamon promised not to touch her lips until she let him do so. She had to make that choice. He swore it, so he must keep his word. Roselyn was sitting on the floor with tears in her eyes. She said, Don't you hate me? Tamon sat with a smile on his face and listened to Roselyn, who said, Why do you torture me, and don't let me die? The man was calm and did not say anything. He said, I have never hated anyone. There are other things you can do. Roselyn didn't understand what they were talking about. Then Tamon said, In any case, I gave you enough power, but received a very negative response from the girl. I didn't ask you. Tamon spoke in a calm tone. If you have no reason to live, you can always find one, can't you? The man began to list all the reasons for Roselyn's life. Hatred, revenge. How about the fall of Thanatos? The girl refused this offer because she was noble and had a conscience. Tamon decided to propose the craziest idea. How about love? He lifted Roselyn's chin and looked into her eyes. The girl was numb with shock. She couldn't understand what he was leading to make love to him? She made a face, and Tamon laughed and said, "I love that look on your face, like you want to hit me." After a while, it was already dark outside, and only the sound of night birds could be heard in the empty countryside. Roselyn was lying in her bed trying to sleep, but her thoughts were all over her head, and she was thinking about today. She had a dream that a city was burning with flames, burning everything in its path and scaring all the people in the city. Somewhere in the street they were shouting, "There is a rift in the sky! They are all coming from here!" Some monster ran to a random house in the city and tried to kill the inhabitants. A city guard shouted, "One of them has made his way into the shelter. Hurry! The Emperor and Empress are in danger." The Empress and the Emperor were in the same room with the children. Several children were sitting and crying, and some were covering their eyes to avoid seeing anything. The girl who was next to the Empress said, "I'm so scared." Tears welled up in her eyes, but the Empress hugged her tightly and said, "Everything will be fine. I will protect you." Roselyn held the girl in her arms and thought, "I didn't expect there to be a rift above the orphanage." And then the wall began to collapse and a bull ran through it, a red monster bull. Roselyn tried to keep her composure, so she sat silently and thought, "Until the Imperial Guard arrives, how much time can we afford?" The monster was approaching the Emperor, who was standing with a sword and trying to defend himself, although it was clear that he was very scared and would run away. The monster's eyes glowed brightly red, obviously determined to kill the Emperors. Roselyn tried to get up to help her husband, but he put his hand on her arm and defiantly said, "Don't worry, Empress." The Emperor pointed his sword in front of him and said, "I have been trained in fencing. This beast is nothing to me." After which, a strange and overwhelming smile appeared on his face. He began to wave his sword in front of the beast's face and shouted, "Come on, attack the monster!" And then this beast opened its terrible mouth. There was a lot of green mucus, and the whole mouth was of an unusual color. Roselyn and the girl in her arms began to scream, and were very worried for their lives, because everyone was pinning their hopes on the Emperor. The Empress realized that she was in great danger and needed to hide as quickly as possible, preferably somewhere where nothing would be heard. However, there was nothing nearby, so she took off running, picking up the child in her arms. And then a very sharp fragment from the back of the beast hit her leg and pierced her tender leg. The Empress was about to scream, but she just pretended to choke and held back her cry as much as she could. She held the child and thought, No, I can't scream if I scream." Roselyn realized that if she shouted, the beast would hear them, because the wig was blind but had very good hearing. But the Emperor began to distract her attention with shouts of, "Why are you ignoring me? Come here!" He continued to shout, "Today I will demonstrate imperial power." But before he could say anything else, a monster kicked him in the stomach. The Emperor quickly flew to the wall and hit his head hard, and when he raised his head, a stone flew into his nose, which was also thrown by the beast. The man started screaming in pain and holding his nose to ease his pain. However, he was more concerned about something else, so he shouted, "What do knights do anyway? I'll kill them all!" The Emperor faced the beast and saw how eager he was to kill it. However, he did not fight with him and began to run away to escape from this crazy and insane beast. He ran past the children with a loud stomp and attracted the attention of the beast in the direction where the innocent children were sitting. However, the Emperor did not defend anyone else and hid behind an overturned table, which now served as a cover for the Emperor. The man was shaking with fear and almost fell down because his legs were already giving out. The children were very disappointed in the Emperor because he was their only protector, and now he was using them as a shield. All hope was left only for the Empress. She had to save everyone and save the other innocent children in the city. However, it was clear from Roselyn's face that she had no idea what she had to do to save everyone. Her mind was filled with thoughts of rescue. And then she came across a sword that the Emperor had dropped while running away from the monster. She came up with an idea, called the child to her, and asked if she could help him, and received a positive response. The Empress smiled and looked sweetly at the boy. Then Roselyn pointed to the beast and said, "Great, you just need to run as fast as you can through the door the monster broke through." And she added to her request, "Can you make very loud noises in the process to attract attention?" They both looked at the beast that walked in circles and did not understand whom to kill. The guy took a few seconds to decide, because it was not easy and he had to dare to do it. A few seconds later, the little child began to run and make very loud sounds that first came to mind. Roselyn gathered her strength and tried to stand up, motivated by the fact that the child was sacrificing her life, so that Roselyn could do what she wanted to do. The child was screaming as hard as she could, and she knew that she was doing everything possible to survive. Roselyn rose to her feet, enduring all this intense pain. Then she swung her sword at the beast, and the next second the sword was covered in blood. Everyone was shocked by the Empress's courage and strength. The Emperor looked in shock at his wife, who was able to kill a huge and very cruel world with her bare hands. Children closed their eyes to avoid seeing this horror. The beast fell to the floor, dead and exhausted. Sweat dripped down her face. She was breathing very hard and could barely stand up. The Empress turned her head, and everyone saw her bloody face and her tired eyes, which showed all the pain. The entire wall was covered in blood, and Roselyn stood with a sword that was dripping with blood. The Emperor was very angry because of this, because all the glory would now go to the Empress, not His Majesty. The children now looked with contempt at the Emperor who had failed to protect them. Meanwhile, the Emperor stood there in shock and indignation, not understanding how some stupid woman could do such a thing. He saw the children's looks and shouted, "I am the Emperor of the country!" The children hardly listened to him anymore, but the Emperor shouted, "How can I put myself in danger? Why are you all looking at me like that?" He looked again at the blood on the Empress's face and shouted at the top of his lungs. Its sound was heard throughout the city, and all the monsters had already been killed by other knights. A few days later, Thanatos was covered in snow and there was a lot of cold around. The Empress was walking down the corridor and heard Natasha laughing very loudly, making fun of someone. It was clear from her words that she was ridiculing the Empress, because she said, "God, this Empress." The Emperor looked at her with contempt and wanted to finish her off. They crossed paths and passed each other, but Natasha did not stop ridiculing Her Majesty. "As sluggish as Your Majesty says." The Emperor smiled evilly, so hypocritically, because he was glad that the Empress was downstairs. Meanwhile, the Empress had almost reached the end of the red carpet. But a few seconds later, Roselyn woke up and realized that it was all just a dream. She realized that this dream was a memory from the past, namely that this incident had happened years ago, and even then the Emperor was just a coward. She sat tiredly on the bed, not knowing what to do, because she did not want to sleep. She remembered again the boy who sacrificed his life because he trusted the Empress. She thought, "Before the banquet, I gave the boy a sacred artifact. At least its magical power can protect him from bad luck." Roselyn got out of bed and began to look around her room where she had been sleeping. Then she began to circle because she felt free. She went out on the balcony and said, "I think it's my time to die." Her eyes opened very wide at the landscape she saw in front of her. Before my eyes, the azure-colored sea was crashing against the shore. At first, she did not understand what it was and thought, "What is this? I only heard the word sea." Roselyn realized that she had been sitting in the palace all her life, and that there was a world with the sea and blue water. And then she got upset and thought, "It's nice to see this view before you die." The girl sat on the edge of the balcony and said, "Thank you, Tamon, for this view." And she pushed off the edge with her feet and started to fly down. However, Tamon's strong arms grabbed Roselyn very tightly and held him over the abyss. He whispered in a very gentle and velvety tone, "From now on, I will not be able to let my guard down even when I sleep." He stopped smiling and became very serious, and Roselyn was just in complete shock at the time. After a few seconds, Tamon held Roselyn in his arms and said, "Come to think of it, I like that I shouldn't mind changing my promise." He continued, "I promised that I would treat you every time you were injured, but that means I would save you anyway." He shifted Roselyn a little bit to make it more comfortable to hold her and said, "But the way I treat is not a big deal. You know that's true?" The man continued to speak in Roselyn's ear, "If you continue to do it even though you know about it." Roselyn was alert and listened carefully. "May I assume that you want to, too?" But the girl's reaction was simply terrifying. She almost fell out of reality. Tamon held her and said, "If you want something, just say it. I'll do anything for you." But Roselyn was ready to hit him to shut him up and stop talking nonsense. Tamon smiled softly, and his dimples lit up his face. Then Tamon carried the girl somewhere, saying, "Since we're awake, let's go for a walk." But Roselyn argued with him and asked him to let her go. A few tears of hopelessness flowed down her eyes. She looked up at Tamon with interest and asked, "Where are we going?" But Tamon replied, "I don't know. Somewhere nice, maybe." And then Tamon asked me to wait. However, Roselyn was no longer in the mood, and she was very sad-looking, even angry. Tamon looked at her with loving eyes and realized that she was worried about something else entirely. Tamon knew that seeing her healthy was very pleasing to the man. It meant that his ability was not in vain. 5 years ago, the guy was just in a wild heat, and his body became very hot. It seems that their hereditary disease was passed down from generation to generation. It would have killed him if he hadn't accidentally found some outdated literature in the corner of their family library. He could have died without knowing that this hereditary disease is actually the fifth part of God, which is considered to be lost, namely life. According to the literature, after the first person with this ability appeared, no one else had the ability to live because no one could resist the power of. The heat will continue to accumulate up to a certain point. If this heat is not released in full, the heart will be overloaded, giving or ruling something from the middle of the body. The woman's embrace could solve this problem. That's why Tamon often sat surrounded by different women in order not to overstrain his heart. But it's strange that this time he didn't want intimacy at all. And then Tamon felt like he was going to be sick and covered his nose and ran outside. All the girls noticed and were embarrassed. Tamon went outside and exhaled heavily, but only a few seconds later, he was disturbed by the stench he suddenly felt in the tent. However, he thought about one thing. He realized that Roselyn didn't smell like that, but the stench of these girls was so bad that it made his eyes gouge out. Tamon caught himself at this thought and was ashamed of himself. Someone suddenly called him, and he seemed to be in a trance. It was Roselyn, she called him, and asked where they were. They drove into Tamon's own forest, and there was something he wanted to show Roselyn. They arrived, but Tamon was the first to go down, and then Roselyn went down as well. She looked at Tamon and said, "I didn't know you were so spontaneous." And then she asked what he wanted to show her so badly. But he kept the secret for a long time and kept the intrigue. He wanted to take the girl there himself. But the girl refused to walk hand in hand with him and said, "I can walk on my own. The ground here is muddy." And then Tamon whispered something in my ear. "Once you fall, you can't get out." After that, he took Roselyn by the waist and bent her over, holding her arm and waist. He said quietly and sweetly, "Like me." Tamon suddenly remembered a situation where he was sitting in his office, and there was a cup of tea in front of him. There were 3 people in the room. One was a servant, the other was a friend of the red-haired man, and the third was Tamon. The servant quietly began to leave the room, and Tamon looked indifferently after him. His red-haired hookah friend draws attention to himself. The man said, "Isn't it time you had a frank talk with me?" And then his voice broke into a shout, and he said, "I mean that woman!" Tamon understood perfectly well what he was talking about, but he played the fool. He asked Tamon if he understood the essence of the question. However, Tamon did not care. The guy shouted out arguments to which Tamon remained silent and indifferently rolled his eyes. The red-haired guy said, "I saw her silver hair." And then Tamon got angry and said, "Then I'll have to gouge your eyes out." After that, the red-haired man began to joke, as if he hadn't seen that much. But he went on to say something else. "Damn, really? It doesn't matter if you do it to me, but Her Majesty is a different matter." However, Tamon continued to act like a boy who knows nothing and understands nothing. And then the man said, "Why did you suddenly remember Her Majesty?" Alk received a response like, "She keeps asking what you brought her." The red-haired man continued, "It feels like someone who was traveling with you came to visit her first." But Tamon said indifferently. Then Redhead said, "You will tell Her Majesty about that woman." Tamon smiled strangely and said, "No." Meanwhile, Roselyn had unknown dreams. A very nice girl called her. She would call her after her and say, "Roz, I really love Sir Ken." She called her to sit next to her and offered her a good time. Roselyn was so surprised that she said, "Sister?" The girl ran to her sister to drink with her for a while. The flavor of the tea wafted right up to Roselyn's nose. But the girl's face changed abruptly with surprise. Instead of tea, she was holding a cup of blood. Someone called her, and there was a girl in chains in front of her. Roselyn recognized her and shouted, "Charlotte!" And then her face changed from tears to fear. The heads of her parents fell to the ground. They had no body, just their heads, the same as during the torture, and voices from the side said, "Our dear Rosie, Your Majesty, you must always be strong." The heads didn't move, and Roselyn covered her mouth to keep from screaming. She didn't understand how it all happened, so she just barely contained herself. Her crying became like hysterical laughter, or rather like the laughter of a psycho, and then a voice behind the girl called out to her. It was my grandfather who said, "I had to protect you. You're disappointed because I always say rude things, right?" My grandfather lowered his head and continued, "I never wanted to send you to the Imperial Palace because I was afraid you would become sad. I'm sorry I left you first." But Roselyn shouted, "No, Grandpa, it was my choice." She was glad that her grandfather did not find out about her torture and died first. It would have broken his heart. She suddenly felt light in her hands. Her grandfather was just an illusion of her mind, so he disappeared very quickly. She called him again and was left alone in the middle of an unknown place. Her eyes were already sore from crying. Everything ached with pain. And then Roselyn smiled and said, "I don't care anymore. I'm going to see them anyway." She accelerated and pushed off the cliff and flew down, but it didn't break as she wanted. Tamon caught it and hugged it gently. He easily put her on the floor and sat down next to her. Then Tamon moved even closer and said, "No matter how many times you try to kill yourself, I will bring you back to life again and again." Roselyn pushed Tamon away and fell to the ground screaming, "Leave me alone! I have no reason to live anymore!" But the man replied with a familiar phrase, "If there are no reasons to live, you can find them again. What do you want? A clean sweep? The destruction of Thanatos?" However, the girl did not need any of this. Then the man took one of Roselyn's silky curls and said, he had the curl in his hands and said, "What about love?" This confused and surprised the girl at the same time. She did not need love. She was already lying on the bed in complete shock and could not understand where she was. Some unknown people stood by the girl's bed and watched her wake up exhausted. One of the maids was very worried about Roselyn because she was suffocating in the morning. They all introduced themselves and said their names. Everyone began to praise the girl's hair, but she didn't seem to care anymore, so she just tried to hold back her tears. Tears began to slowly flow down her eyes from the memories. But Roselyn began to cry very hard and then scream. All the maids were worried, and the two twins ran off somewhere, and the eldest of them began to calm the girl down. The twins saw their owner and started shouting his name. The owner turned out to be Tamon, and the girls were breathlessly trying to tell what had happened. They said, "There's a very beautiful woman there. She..." But they couldn't finish because of the shortness of breath in their throats. The girls finally took a breath and said, she's crying, and won't stop crying." After that, Tamon took off and ran very fast through Roselyn's room. The girls were shocked and only managed to turn their heads after him, and that was it. They began to echo something. Some were right, and some were wrong, as if they were arguing about something. The twins looked at each other strangely and looked in Tamon's direction, and then they ran somewhere else as well. The girl had already calmed Roselyn down and was singing her a prayer and telling her that everything would be fine. Roselyn was replaying this prayer in her head and thought, "A prayer that my atheist nanny used to sing. I thought she was like her, but she was just an atheist." The girl asked Rasklin, "Do your eyes not hurt anymore? Would you like me to give you some water?" And then Tamon burst into the room. He saw Roselyn's eyes on him and gestured for the maid to leave the room. Tamon walked over to the bed and looked at Roselyn, who was too embarrassed to turn her face to him. His eyes showed anxiety and worry. He knelt down on one knee in front of the girl, and then he took her and shook her by the shoulders to turn her face to him and catch her eyes. Roselyn was again embarrassed by such intimacy. Tamon hugged the girl's shoulders so warmly and tenderly. He was only worried about her condition, and all the problems magically faded into the background. The girl was shocked by such sudden movements. She sharply pushed the man away from her, but received a calm question. "Do you cry after torture?" Tamon was very worried about the girl's health and morale. She said, "My ankle hurts, I want to lie down for a minute." Tamon looked at Roselyn's bandaged leg and began to do something that seemed very strange to the girl. She moved her head away from the man, as if afraid of him, but he only kissed her leg, treating it gently and tenderly. She wasn't afraid of it anymore. She just didn't understand how he could do it so casually. Suddenly, memories appeared in her head. The emperor shouted at her, so loudly that all the servants almost covered their ears to avoid hearing it. The emperor shouted, "So what if you hurt your leg? Why should I waste my time in this shoemaker's workshop?" Roselyn listened to her husband's cries in silence, like a small child listening to her parents. The emperor continued, "Do you think your feet won't hurt if you wear proper shoes? You really just want to hide those dirty feet." And then she heard a phrase that simply turned her world upside down. "Even with the most beautiful silk, your feet will be the ugliest in the world." The girl wondered how he could kiss her feet, which she considered ugly. She asked, "Don't you think my legs are ugly?" But Tamon said, "Of course not, they're beautiful." Roselyn smiled and said, "Are you really shameless?" To which she replied, "I guess so." Her head began to hurt a little, but Tamon continued to smile without noticing it. She fell into her husband's arms and said, "I'm so tired of talking to you." To which Tamon replied warmly, "Maybe you're very hungry." He carried her in his arms, holding her waist so she wouldn't fall, and said, "Since you're awake, would you like to come to breakfast with me?" To which Roselyn did not give a clear answer, but there was no refusal either. A few days ago, two men were riding in a carriage in a deserted area and talking about something. Later it became clear that they were talking about the Empress and the Emperor, namely, Her Majesty to be tortured? This Emperor has gone completely mad. Another man told his friend to shut up, otherwise they would be in trouble. A boy of about was sitting in the back of the carriage, listening to the adults' conversations. "Who will hear this on this road? Are you afraid of the guy sitting behind you?" One of the men turned his head to the boy and shouted, "Brother, you should have just put him in the coffin. I'll get my whip and beat him." It was not very clear what exactly the man meant, but it did not matter, because the boy thought only that now the emperor was following Natasha's orders, and she was a treacherous woman. He recalled how he knelt before Empress Roselyn and begged her to do at least something for him. The empress thought for a long time about whether to trust a teenager who could have anything in his head. However, she decided to take a chance and came up with a task for him. She gave him a necklace and said, "Can you deliver this to Lovra, a port city in the northeast?" Roselyn bent a little lower to be on the same level as the boy and continued, "Find a trader there named Red Snake. You must give it to him before he crosses the waters of Thalia." She warned him that the road would be very dangerous, and he should think very carefully before taking responsibility for this product. However, the guy looked very confident. He said, "Your Imperial Majesty, I will definitely successfully complete this mission." For a few seconds, the Empress doubted whether she had entrusted the goods to that person. However, a few seconds later, she patted him on the head as if she were his mother or sister, so friendly and so warm that Arson was very surprised. He looked at Roselyn and she replied, "Thank you, Arson." This amulet reminded him of his mission. It was a strange thing, because as soon as the boy put the necklace on his hand, it turned into a bracelet, so Roselyn wanted Arson to give it to the trader. Thalia is a river basin bordering Lovra, a place where various scary monsters often appear. Some countries took turns conquering it. After each attempted conquest, trade was active for 2 months. This period was called the trading month. The trading month was about to end, and the guy had to get there in days. Otherwise, Arson will never know when he will meet the red snake merchant again. He clenched his fist and set himself up to hand over the goods to the trader. He tried to get up, but the carriage stopped abruptly and the boy was thrown to his knees. Someone was asking for help very pitifully and shouting at some people. The light from someone blinded the boy, so he reflexively covered his eyes with his hand to protect himself. Some people stood in front of him. They were wearing black cloaks, and one of them said, "I think this child will be useful to us." Arson was taken by the hands and taken out of the carriage, which had not moved for a long time. He only managed to say, "I am a student of the Imperial Academy." A bandage was put on his mouth, after which everything started to spin in his head, and his legs stopped holding their owner and went numb. The last thing he saw before he passed out were strange people in black cloaks. Sometimes Roselyn sat on the balcony and watched the waves in the sea with interest. She loved spending time here. The white foam on the beach was so beautiful, and the waves were blue, even azure. She could not believe her eyes. She had been locked up for so long, and now she had complete freedom. Tamon noticed Roselyn's strange interest. The man put his fork down on his plate and asked, "You must like looking at the sea, it's nothing special." But Roselyn did not turn her head away from the guy and replied, "I just never saw him before." Shocked by this answer, Tamon said, "For the first time? You've really never seen the sea before?" And Roselyn confirmed her words for the second time with the phrase, "Yes, I have." Tamon asked why, because Thanatos is not a closed place without windows and doors. The girl sighed lightly and answered briefly, "Because I was forbidden to leave the palace." Tamon nodded his head in acknowledgement and began to eat the food from the table. The woman saw it and realized that she had never seen this dish before. She decided to think about what was on the table. Tamon saw Roselyn's interest and said, "Scallop." The man tasted another artificial one and continued, "More precisely, scallop meat, something like a large clam, served in thin raw slices. Very tasty." And today, scallop tasted even better than usual for Tamon. Roselyn lowered her head to look at the dish. She brought a piece of the dish to her mouth and then began to eat it. Tamon's smile softened the awkward silence between them a little, and she continued to eat the food that was on their table. Roselyn thought about her boyfriend Arson and hoped that he was okay and safe. Then the girl looked at the balcony railing and looked down thoughtfully. This balcony was already so familiar. Recently, Roselyn tried to commit suicide on it. Roselyn demonstratively put her fork down on the table to show that she had finished eating. The man's eyes were fixed on Roselyn, and he followed her emotions and movements. He said, "Your look has changed dramatically. Do you remember what you wanted to do here not so long ago?" Tamon leaned back and said, "Before you forget, I'll ask you a question." The sudden change in mood was a challenge for Tamon, so he continued, "Why did you want to die so badly?" Roselyn lowered her head, attracting Tamon's attention more and more, and answered, "Because I couldn't protect them." And then the Tamon psychologist mode was activated, after which he said, "Do you think it's your fault?" To which he received a positive answer. Then Tamon banged his fingernails on the table. It was a deaf but very clear sound. He continued, "It's very strange. You say you feel guilty." Tamon did not stop talking and said, "But why did their deaths cause yours?" And then the girl was hit with a stun gun and snapped, "Why? You're asking about the reason? Really?" Tamon's smile was slowly disappearing from his face. He looked at her and said, "Anything can happen? Maybe you wouldn't be able to protect them?" He put his right hand on the table and leaned on it, and his speech continued, "Did anyone tell you that you have to pay for their deaths with your own life?" Roselyn seemed to understand everything, but she did not want to understand at the same time, and Tamon's therapy continued, "Do you think they would have wanted this? They didn't wait for their own death." So the man continued, "And it's not fair that they died. Do you think their feelings don't matter now? You really are heartless." But Roselyn denied everything he said with the phrase, "That's not what I said." A ripple ran through her body, shaking in her hands and throughout her body. It was sunset outside, so they looked irresistible against it together. Tamon suddenly interrupted. "If it were me," he said, "I would die to protect a person I value." Roselyn looked up at him and he continued, "But it would appear that the man is using my death to blame himself." Tamon said something else. "I'm sure they would even rise from their graves to tell you that I'm fine." Roselyn was shocked by this, and the man continued, "And I wanted to be like that with you. It's not your fault." She couldn't listen to it because tears were streaming down her face. But despite this, Tamon said, "You are the most beautiful person in the world." He said, "Become the one who will be happiest of all." Meanwhile, the emperor was flying in his dreams and fantasies. He was walking through an unknown swamp and calling for help. He said that there should be at least one living soul around him to save him. There was a lot of purple mucus around him, but something caught his attention. He thought someone was calling him. A huge silhouette of his father appeared before the emperor, which surprised him greatly. He started shouting how miserable his son was, and that he should have given the place to someone else who really deserved it. One could tell from his tone that he was very angry with his son. He said, "For your sake, I had to beg on my knees to bring the bride back to the throne and make you the crown prince." My father continued to speak in a tone of shouting, "So make sure you discuss all decisions with the empress." He also told me never to make decisions on my own. My father shouted at ours, and all the mucus around him went up in the air. He humiliated him for a few more minutes, telling him what a trash he was, and that he should kiss his feet for such an opportunity as an emperor. However, the emperor could not bear these humiliating words, and decided to run away as far as possible from his father. Finally, he shouted to his father, "What else did I have to lose? What did I do wrong? Where else are you going to get me?" And then he saw a very familiar silhouette, the silhouette of the empress, but she was already dead to him, so why did he dream about her? She would slowly turn to him with a wide smile and call him emperor. The man froze at what he saw before his eyes. He did not believe that the empress could still be alive. He started shouting, "You're dead! You don't exist!" However, the empress did not disappear and continued to say, "All the crimes you have committed will boomerang back to you, your majesty." After that, many butterflies flew at the emperor and blinded his eyes. At one point, I heard a very loud thud everywhere, as if something had exploded. The emperor fell to the floor and lay there exhausted for several seconds. And when I opened my eyes, I realized that I was at home with Natasha. Natasha asked, "Did you have a nightmare?" and received the answer, "The empress." The man broke into a scream and said, "Empress, she is still alive. I know it." Natasha realized that the person she hated the most was still alive. She hugged the emperor and said, "My poor emperor, the empress is dead," but was met with shouts of, "I need to make sure she's really dead." The man pushed Natasha to the side by force, and she fell to the ground next to the bed. The man ran with all his might somewhere, and Natasha tried to call him, but it was all in vain. She was disappointed in the emperor. He needed to see the empress even dead, but she had no idea where the empress was now. Natasha rolled over to sit more comfortably, and suddenly her head hurt. She thought that the problem was the empress, and that after her death everything would be better. But the emperor's selfishness was growing wildly in relation to Natasha. She stroked her belly. She was pregnant, and after gentle taps on her belly, she said, "This place will be your child someday." Only the child had to be born before she would have the right to the throne. Roselyn continued to sit on the beach, watching the blue water wash over the sand. She loved the view, but her thoughts were always haunting her. Tamon was silent, looking at how depressed the girl was. But he interrupted this unintentional pause and said, "I was absorbing," to which he received a surprised accent from Roselyn. Tamon continued with, "A new name for you. Roselyn asked again, not understanding what Tamon was talking about. His eyes shone brightly with a red glow. He gently moved over to Roselyn and took one of the strands of hair from her face with his hands. And then he said the name he thought of. Ahranosia, abbreviated to Ashia. Roselyn, that is Ashia, asked how it was translated and what it meant. And then Tamon got up from the table and said, "Oh, it's so warm that I'm drowsy. I need to sleep." He gently held out his hand as a sign to follow him. She didn't understand what he wanted from her, so she asked, "What do you want from me?" And Tamon replied, "Let's sleep together." For some reason, Roselyn's eyes were filled with tears. She squeezed his hand and said, "I want to see the sea again." And Tamon replied, "You should have just asked." Roselyn Ashia let go of Tamon's hand, looking at him with indifferent eyes. She was still upset and kept her head down. But then the ground disappeared under her feet, and she felt Tamon take her in his arms. She asked loudly, "Why did you suddenly pick me up?" And the man answered with a smile on his face, "It will be much faster." She asked me to put it down and shouted Tamon Xaris' name, but Tamon liked it and even got turned on. She shouted that she hated him. He suddenly stopped and said, "It's here." And Roselyn turned her head forward in alarm. She was in a luxurious room with a beautiful view of the sea. Sea animals were visible on the stone. They looked like seals that were happily lying and basking in the sun, resting at the same time. The waves hit the stones and floated back, creating a loud tidal sound. Roselyn was mesmerized by this landscape. Her heart seemed to stop in shock. Tamon gently laid Roselyn on the bed and began to cover her with a blanket. And then he sat down next to her, but it seemed to upset the girl very much. "You can look out at the sea and lie here at the same time," he said in Roselyn's ear in a quiet voice. The next second, he lay down next to Rasklina in bed and calmly watched the sea. He looked at the waves and breezes of white color. In the room, there were lamps with pink bandages hanging on the ceiling. Tamon quickly fell asleep, hugging Rasklin, and she noticed it. She remembered his words and thought about everything to the smallest detail. She was embarrassed that she was listening to Tamon's words, and that the thought of death didn't seem so cool. She did not know what to do. She lay there and remembered Tamon's words. "You are the most wonderful person of all." His words were spinning in my head like a boomerang and could not get out. Roselyn turned her head to Tamon, watching him sleep. Then she lifted her gentle hand and tucked Tamon's hair behind his ear so that it would not disturb his sleep. She looked into his eyes and thought, "Because of this man, I lose the desire for my own death." Suddenly, the man began to gnash his teeth very hard and turn around. He turned to the other side. It looked like he was in pain. He began to make sounds of pain, and Roselyn was very worried about him. He was drenched in sweat. His body was burning, and the pain was increasing. He started to take off his outerwear and examine the outerwear, unable to explain anything to Roselyn. She looked at it confused. She touched his body and realized that it was very hot, so she began to worry even more. He continued to almost tear his body apart from the pain. The woman looked at him anxiously. She could not understand what was wrong with him and why he was in so much pain in the middle of the night. A few seconds later, Roselyn was already screaming at Tamon, watching him smash his hands against the walls. He was banging his head against the wall, and Rasklin was shouting at him, "Stop it, Tamon! You're going to kill yourself, Tamon!" Alk Tamon shouted back, "Don't come any closer." He ordered Roselyn to stay where she was and not to come closer to him under any circumstances. Tamon continued to twist in pain and clench his teeth, and then the swearing started. He tried to restrain himself, but at least he could swear. And then something occurred to her, namely the idea that it might be his hereditary disease. Roselyn thought, "It's a hereditary disease that affects every generation of rough families. I've heard of it, but didn't know it was so serious." The woman thought about how to help, but could not even imagine the pain the boy was going through. And Tamon was thinking, "I have to control myself so that I don't go crazy, otherwise I will break the promise I made to her." It was not described in the book, but the necessary information was in the book. It can be dangerous to give your life energy to a partner who is not your sealing partner. Tamon was sure that the impact would be greater because he had been overusing his energy, and lately, "I've been not releasing my energy, so this heat is stuck in him." Tamon was thinking, one more time. I think I can solve this problem one more time." Roselyn suggested calling one of the assistants. Maybe they could solve this problem. And then she said, "Is it because of your abilities?" She continued, "If you still won't let me call anyone, it means you're still keeping them a secret." Roselyn was silent for a while and then said, "Can I help you?" This surprised Tamon because Roselyn's help could have helped him a lot. He asked in surprise, "Are you serious?" To which Roselyn replied, "I've never been as serious as I am now." She looked at him expecting some kind of request or something like that, The Tamon muscles tensed sharply. He put his hand on Roselyn's cheek, touching her lips lightly. Tamon began to approach Roselyn without thinking about whether it was safe. He said, "Then I won't refuse." Then he kissed her very gently on the lips, holding her waist and cheek. The night turned to day, and the sun was shining brightly outside. The night passed. They seemed to have slept together, and Roselyn poked her hands at Tamon, saying, "Enough! Now I want to sleep." The man said, "A little more," and started kissing the woman's neck, and she laughed and said, "I'm sleepy, I swear." Roselyn looked at Tamon and thought, "I offered to help him, but I didn't expect the night to be so hot." Now Tamon looked better, so the woman was worried about him. She went to bed, and Tamon began to gradually cover her with a blanket. He called her Aranosha. He thought of her. From a distance, she seems cold, but if you look closely, she also whines. He stroked her face, removing the extra strands of hair from her face. He once again lay down in her bed and turned her around, saying, "You are a very attractive woman. Cuddling with you is heaven for me." He suddenly heard somewhere outside the door, "Your Majesty!" There were servants standing at Tamon's door, and the Empress came to them and said, "Don't make a scene, and what if you are Tamon's servants?" She folded her arms and continued, "Come on, don't be so stubborn, sir." And then the door to Tamon's bedroom creaked open. The Empress was very pleased with this and exclaimed with joy. Tamon squeezed his eyes shut and said, "What's going on? Why are you up so early?" And then the Empress coughed several times and said, "Good morning? Did you say morning? Let's see, since when is PM morning?" Tamon put his hand behind the cushion in surprise and said, "This late? I knew I felt strange because my body was sick." The Empress then asked to go into his bedroom to talk, but Tamon offered to escort her to the living room. Demonstratively, the girl threw her head back on her forehead and shouted, "How dare you contradict the queen? I can cut off your head, Tamon." Tamon said, "So why did you come here?" "I was planning to do shadows for the palace today. Why?" Before Tamon could finish speaking, he was interrupted by the joyful queen who said, "You woke up at PM, and if you come, it means you'll be late. Don't you want to spend time with me now?" But Tamon sharply replied, "That's impossible," and closed his bedroom door. The queen realized that Tamon was hiding something and said, "My heart hurts because of your firm refusal, but you know that it becomes suspicious when you hide something there?" She furrowed her brow and said, "I didn't come because I was bored and wanted to fight. I heard from the messenger that you brought something from Thanatos." The queen thought that Tamon would come and tell her about it, but he never came, so she decided to visit him herself. Tamon said, "There's only a woman shivering with no clothes on." But the queen replied, "No, that doesn't explain anything either. If it's a woman, she could have run away scared. If it is a woman, then you can come with me. The minister and I will be a good couple." Tamon bowed his head and said, "It's a very honorable offer, but I refuse." The queen did not understand what the problem was. Something was wrong with Tamon, these abrupt refusals, something from Thanatos, and in general, there were too many secrets. Something was wrong here. She pushed Tamon away and threw the door wide open, saying, "Get out of the way." The man was very angry at this uninvited visit and ran after the queen. The queen ran to the bed, shouting, "Let's see what kind of woman this is if you're trying to hide her so hard." And then the queen's face abruptly changed from angry to surprised. She took off Ashia's blanket and stood looking at her. She found her very attractive, and the queen was very interested in her. The queen stood for a few seconds and said, "My God, is the woman right?" Tamon had already burned out on style in front of Asia and did not know how to resolve this conflict. The women looked at each other in silence, exchanging glances and not looking away. Tamon sighed heavily and said, "You've gone too far." The queen said, "Silver hair, eyes like the most transparent amethyst shine. I know I've heard of such features somewhere. This woman is not by chance what you brought back from Thanatos." Tamon sighed and replied, "I don't know where you heard this false information. In fact, no one saw what I brought from Thanatos." The man continued, "I didn't get anything for a minute. How did you know that I brought a person or a thing and told you?" He was already very angry and said, "I don't know who told you this, but it looks like I have to file a petition because of perjury." The queen frowned and folded her hands in front of her. She asked me something else. "Okay, if you're so sure, what did you bring back from Thanatos?" His mouth fell open because he didn't know what to say. But after a few seconds, he said silver deer skin, and the women were just shocked. Tamon repeated once more, and the queen cried out, "The real skin of the silver deer?" The queen shouted with joy, "At last, we have an honest defender against the beasts. I almost gave up on this idea because they were endangered. You had to take them straight to the palace." Tamon replied, "Why do you think I will give the shukura to your majesty? It was so hard for me to get it." but the queen tried everything he wanted for the skin. However, the queen finally realized that she did not know this woman. If she was not a thing from Thanatos, then who was she? Tamon looked at Aranosha. He replied, "This woman's slave is from Nameless. I bought her for a lot of money." The queen thought Tamon was a sexual and was very surprised to learn that he had bought a woman. The queen said, "This is a large sum of money. You've never been interested in women. But why suddenly her?" Tamon approached Aranosia and said, "There are many reasons, but most importantly, she is not like anyone else." Tamon continued, "Although I have never met her, her face resembles the features of the Empress of Thanatos." The queen turned her head to Aranosha again and asked, "So, where are you from?" Ashia thought for a few seconds before saying anything and looked at the queen. After this question, Ashia grabbed Tamon's hand and pulled him toward her. She asked in another language with a frightened face, "Who is she? Did you have a wife? Will I be expelled now?" The man thought, "Hiruni? She speaks it so easily? Perhaps you know that the queen is very kind to Hirush, and you're counting on that." The man replied, "No, she is the queen. You have nothing to fear, my silver fox, and know that I do not have a wife." The queen was stunned. She did not believe that Aranosha was Hirushi's slave. Tamon replied, "She looks like a Hirusha, but she doesn't speak the language well." The queen asked the name of this Hirushi slave. But Ashia replied, "I'm sorry, my state is still bad. If you don't mind, ugliness your question." The queen calmly repeated it in Hirushin. Ashia considered how best to answer, whether to tell the truth or pretend. Ashia introduced herself as Aranosia, and Tamon was very surprised. The man thought, "I came up with this name because I love the ocean. I made it from the long-forgotten Amor language. For Tamon, Roselyn is the most beautiful sea, so he came up with the name Aranosia." Ashia was tired and asked everyone to leave the room. Ashia wondered how Tamon could be a sexual. Ashia thought he was a madman, a pervert, an idealist, a monster. How could he be someone who was not interested in women? Ashia realized that this was not her concern and decided to go to sleep. However, his thoughts still revolved around yesterday, and he did not want Aranosia to help him. Tamon saved Ashia's life, and she hugged him, but only this time. By the way, they were talking about the silver-haired Alan, and Ashia thought about him. Cruel, sensitive silver deer, if difficult to tame. To preserve these deer, the emperor gave the children to shepherds. As a result, the children who decided to stay in the herd of silver deer were able to tame them, and people called them Lagor Lesi. There are only two of them left, Brother Miro and Lucentio. Ashia lay there thinking about it for a very long time, and came across a memory. The children begged for mercy and promised to take care of the reindeer and always be there for them. They asked for mercy for the deer, which are hunted indiscriminately. They asked to protect them from the emperor. And then the empress promised that as long as she lived, she would protect the children and the deer from the emperor. Ashia did not know what to do with these children now. She was not an empress now, and could not simply return to Thanatos. She was tormented by the thought of what happened to them now, where they were, and whether they were okay. Tamon came quietly into the room and said, "My silver fox is so dreamy. Did you not hear someone come in?" She smiled, and Tamon smiled back.